Hello, class, and welcome to our week discussing strategic management and lobbying. And really, I want you to think about this week as looking at strategies generally. Most of the time, we're talking about very short-term strategies, things like how you can budget your next day, budget your time for the next week, how you can budget your time spent raising funds. Strategic management takes that out of that sort of short and longer short-term strategies, but still short-term, and starts thinking about long-term, 2 to 3, 5-year max strategies. And then at the very top of that, if you can think of lobbying as these strategies to solve the problem in the long run. And that is to say that if you can get government on board, if you can get policymakers on board, then maybe you can solve your problem indefinitely. One of the things that nonprofit workers are always saying is that they're trying to work themselves out of business. Well, lobbying is definitely one way that you can work yourself out of business by creating a permanent social safety net, say, or a permanent fix for an environmental problem, or a permanent place to house entrepreneurship. Or create policies that support entrepreneurship. So this is the longest possible term strategy in a lot of ways. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Oh, computer's taking a bit. Hold on one second. So I don't have much to say about strategic management, really. It's not my specialty. People who do it have remarkable impact. They have remarkable ways of working with nonprofits and getting nonprofits to do things that are quite spectacular. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that people are just thinking bigger. They're getting outside of the day-to-day, thinking about the big effects that their nonprofit is having, and getting clarity in a ways, and trying to keep those longer term goals in mind as they work. However, it can be a little clear but fuzzy. So this is an article that just came out yesterday in a Australian business magazine about strategic management. And this "be clear but fuzzy" is a quote from that article. That's one of their tips, is how to be clear but fuzzy. And I think the reason for that is really well captured in Mintzberg's piece called "The Fall and Rise of Strategic Planning." And that is that really, if you get too far into any one concrete plan, if you stick too close to a strategy, you can't adapt. You can't think on your feet and make new changes. So you do have to try to think big and stay aimed at that goal. But if environment shifts in these 2 to 3 years that you're engaging in the strategic plan, you have to adjust. And that's a point that I tried to make in the quiz that you'll be taking today as you read about strategic management. And it's a point that both of the authors of today's work on strategic management, also make. So now I'm going to talk more deeply about lobbying, and that is because of this quote by Ted Lowy, who you can see there in 2004, rather, when he was campaigning on behalf of John Kerry. And he argues that policy creates politics. That is to say that it's not necessarily politicians who go up and create a policy, right? But rather, when politicians create a policy, that creates new politics. And that is to say, lobbying from nonprofits. I'll give you a few examples here. Let's start with W.E.B. Du Bois. There on the top left is an early 20th century Black church. W.E.B. Du Bois was an author and great sociologist from the turn of the 20th century. And he argued that after the Civil War, they tried an experiment called the Freedmen's Bureau, where they were essentially, in some cases, actually at Port Royal, a place in South Carolina, they were actually giving freed slaves 40 acres and a mule. Well, the Congress didn't like this very much because it's really expensive to give people land and livestock. And so they decided, instead of giving people land and livestock and education and whatnot. And the freedmen's schools were very impressive. They gave a lot of people education, got a lot of Black people their start start climbing out of the slavery conditions. But instead of continuing to give those services, the Congress decided we would just give them the vote, make them full citizens, is what they said. The result was that suddenly a lot of the things the government was doing, government couldn't do anymore because it didn't have any money to do it. All they had now was a vote, and it was a vote that was being systematically denied by the violence of whites in the South in particular, which is where most Black people lived. The result was the creation of the Black church, not just as a place to pray, but as a place to give benefits: food, water, clothing, housing, jobs, training, education. Everything was coming out of the Black church. The Black church became an alternative government. This is what W.B. Du Bois argues. The Black church became this alternative government. And with it, it also started bringing out people to the polls to vote systematically. Their congregants came out and vote systematically. And you can see in this the origins of the NAACP, which is the group that the W.E. Du Bois, in fact, started. And after that, you can see the origins of the Civil Rights Movement. And in those, the origins of Black Lives Matter. So here we've created all these politics came out of this policy decision. The policy decision was, let's give Black people the vote. The politics that came out of it was this string of empowerment and movements out of nonprofits. But it's not all a good thing, right? Because on the other hand, we've got this plaque from the UDC there on the bottom right-hand part of the plaque. That's the United Daughters of the Confederacy. United Daughters of the Confederacy began to grow concerned about how Confederacy and their soldiers were being painted as not noble warriors, rather as slavers and racists. So they started going around creating historic sites to honor Confederate soldiers. And they started repainting the narrative, claiming that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, but was in fact about states' rights. That's them. They created that line. They formed a nonprofit organization based on that and started taking over several schools, school boards, and forcing schools to teach this alternative version of Civil War history that we still find in a lot of classrooms today. So that one action created all of this politics around race for more than 100 years. And a lot of the tensions we find ourselves in now can be credited to that decision by the Congress to end the Freedmen's Bureau and instead give Black people the vote, Black men the vote. Let's take a more modern example. So a couple of weeks ago, I introduced you to this graph, which is a graph of Denver Public Schools and their nonprofit PTSA partners. At the bottom, you see this is the rate of children who are free and reduced lunch in these schools from left to right. So these, if they're over here, that's a lot of kids who are free and reduced lunch, which is about poverty and a half where you find free and reduced lunch. And then on the left over here is schools with fewer kids who are free and reduced lunch. And over here, you've got the logged amount of dollars that go per pupil to the PTSA. In other words, how wealthy the PTSA is, how much money the PTSA can spend on different things for their students. And you see that there's a hard line here where schools that have more kids who are poor are less likely to get money for their nonprofits to support those kids. Whereas schools that have kids who are already wealthy, who don't really need the nonprofits to provide extra services quite as much as the schools that are not as wealthy, they have tons of money to provide those services anyway, right? And I called it, and I referred to an article that stipulated this would be happening called Robin Hood in Reverse, where we're stealing from the poor to give to the wealthy. Well, that really is a result in a lot of ways of lobbying. So this is a bake sale for a school to try and go to Belize in case of this photograph, right? So they are raising money for their own purposes, very small amount of purposes. So this is the actions that that nonprofit takes, and this is the PTSA. So this PTSA engages in trying to raise money for certain things, like nonprofits going to, like the students rather, going to Belize, or students, in the case of the school where my kids go, students who were doing laundry for kids who are staying in homeless shelters and motels and don't have access to laundry facilities. So we're spending money, getting quarters, and going to the laundromat once a week, right? So we're doing these very individual techniques. Well, that's not the origins of the PTSA. Originally, the PTSA was, their job was to go to government and lobby. They went to the state house, they went to this school board meeting like this on the right, and they went and they lobbied and they spoke in front of these organizations to try and get more monies for schools generally. So they were able to circumvent that Robin Hood and reverse effect by actually trying to lift all boats, right? And this is another example of how politics creates, or how policy creates politics. As we have created more school choice, schools have become less aligned and more competitive against one another. And so they're less likely to lobby Congress, lobby the legislature, lobby school boards together. And so they're more likely to focus on their own schools and improving their own schools in relation to the other schools, thereby focusing more on bake sales like that at the top and less on state houses and school boards like that at the bottom. Here's another bigger example. We have the 1,000 Points of Light program that was introduced by this man's father, George W. Bush's father, George H.W. Bush, introduced the 1,000 Points of Light program, which was going to use nonprofits and churches and other organizations, such as the ones that we want to run as nonprofit managers, to deliver massive amounts of services that were currently being delivered by the government. And George W. Bush said, I have spoken of 1,000 points of light. Of all the community organizations, that's us, that's nonprofits, that are spread like stars throughout the nation doing good. Well, that's absolutely true, but there's 1,000 points of light. They're not a light, they're not a group, right? They're points, they're separated, they're disentangled. And so each one of these groups that he's now created by adding more money, each one of them has a lobbying voice. You see, so when we went and took it out of government, started to put into these nonprofits, we created these politics, these nonprofits that were going to lobby Congress and state legislatures and whatnot. Here we have the Colorado Charter Schools Conference, which is an organization that lobbies the Colorado State House every year to improve, give more money to, and create more charter schools and fewer neighborhood schools. Over here we have the Legislative Lobby Day, which is a national coalition for the homeless initiative. And the Coalition for Homeless Individuals once a year will get all their people in and lobby legislators throughout the country. So once again, you see this 1,000 points of light, which was supposed to do one thing, had this effect of creating all these lobbying organizations that we are all now have to be a part of, because they purposefully created organizations that could advocate on behalf of their clients or their beneficiaries. And that's who you are. You are supposed to be advocating on behalf of your beneficiaries, not just giving them the Band-Aid that holds them over to the next time, but also going in to Congress and lobbying them using the instructions that we see in Chapter 14 for today. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about strategic management and lobbying. So let's move on to the nonprofit leader profiles that you have due in a few weeks. I think at the beginning of April, so it's more than a month. I don't know the exact date. But here's what I expect. People are a little confused about what my expectations are. I do expect you to physically interview a leader, a nonprofit leader. This can be over the telephone, but in person would be best. Skype would be second best, if you know what I mean. The closer you can get to this person, I mean, it'd be great if you could take a tour of their organization, meet the leader, meet all the people, and really get engaged in that organization when you're doing it. Spend 60 to 90 minutes at least on this interview. If you want to do a couple shorter interviews, that's fine too. That might help you to clarify your questions. I want you to think about the background research and incorporate that into your written profile. And the profile should also include insights into funding, strategic thinking, governance, and personal motivations for the interviewee. Why is the interviewee even in a nonprofit? Why is he leading it or she leading it? And why is she doing it in this particular nonprofit? What is it about this issue that motivates the leader? Or is this leader just a manager, right? Citations aren't as important for this paper, neither for your final paper. I'm trying to help you get papers that are a little more useful to your daily life. This one isn't going to be particularly useful to your daily life, but I don't want you to be thinking about where's the scholarship that supports my ideas here. What I want you to be thinking about is, how do you relate to this nonprofit? How does this nonprofit relate to its leader? And how do you relate to the leader? I want you to be a part of this process. So I'm not so worried about scholarly citations. I hope that answers most of your questions. If you have any more, text me, email me, or call me. So this week we'll be doing the quiz. Open up the quiz and I'll walk you through chapters 4 and Mintzberg and then chapter 14 using the quiz. The last question about the quiz is about this video, so I hope you're watching this video first. And then the discussion will be following the news around strategic management and in particular around lobbying and thinking about how you would lobby for a nonprofit that wanted to help its beneficiaries. And the next week we'll talk about social enterprise, which is a topic that I researched quite a lot. I was a research assistant for a man who's known for his social enterprise research, and I did quite a lot of work on social enterprise. So I'm excited to look at it. It's a fascinating topic for me, absolutely fascinating. All right, thanks a lot. And as always, call me or text me at 970-236-6311. Have a great day. Bye.